What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a look at Crown Wars, the Black Prince, an upcoming TRPG set during the 100 Years' War. But before I dive into all that, it is important that I mention right here at the beginning of the video that this is in fact sponsored by the game's publisher, Nacon, with the game itself being developed by Artifacts Studio. And with that exact thing in mind, there will be a link in the description if you like what you see here and want to learn more, as the game itself will be available on PC, PS5, and Xbox Series X and S, with it coming to Switch at a later date. But with that out of the way, let's dive into this one. So, Crown Wars, as I mentioned, takes place during the 100 Years' War, though it's more of an alternative history approach to it with some, I would say, low fantasy elements, involving things like the occult, to make for an even more tumultuous time than the 100 Years' War already was. And within that setting, we're going to be playing as a family fallen on hard times that has to build up their estate and forces in a single-player campaign that's going to run you about 20 to 30 hours. But right as you start up the game, you're first going to pick from a few different difficulty options with Squire, Knight, or Baron, which is effectively easy, normal, or hard, giving you a bit of leeway to customize your experience if you're a little less familiar with TRPGs and simply more interested in the historical adjacent setting here. Now, all of these difficulty modes, though, will come with a potential hero mode that you can toggle on or off that effectively acts as a sort of Iron Man mode, meaning that your choices are much more permanent than they would normally be because you'll only have one save slot with a limited number of autosaves. You can disable this in the middle of a playthrough, but it cannot be re-enabled afterwards. But if you want that harder, more permanent approach to your gameplay, there is an option for that, which is especially noteworthy because as a TRPG, you'll be managing a lot of troops, and if you have some favorites that you've customized, they can very much so die permanently. And normally, you'd be able to load back a save if you want to try again, but hero mode of course prevents that. Now the game itself kicks off with a bit of a tutorial showing you the basics of combat, but also setting up the story. That being that the 100 Years' War is in full swing, but in an effort to win this war, some people have turned to unspeakable acts of the occult, and the Brotherhood, as it's known, has risen up to fight exactly that threat that these more sinister forces represent. But as the game opens, the Brotherhood has been attacked and is forced to make a hasty retreat that serves as a bit of your combat tutorial, though right after this, you'll be able to pick which family you happen to hail from. This is a pretty important choice with a few other things to note. While these family bonuses will give you a boon to your starting position, such as extra consumables or an already upgraded type of weapon, for instance, or a extra soldier of a particular class, it perhaps more importantly will shape a few extra specific battles that you'll be fighting over the course of the campaign. That said, just as an aside, you are not stuck with the exact coat of arms that you see on the side here. That can be customized a little later once you get to your castle, which happens right after this, or to be more specific, your domain. Like any good TRPG, we'll be managing our own base of operations that we'll be setting out from to undertake tasks or individual missions. Mission types come in all shapes and sizes, with the main story ones being a little bit more involved generally, but other types of missions include simple assassinations where you kill a specific target and then exit, a rescue operation where you need to free someone and then make an exit, an escort quest where your goal is to move across the map, skirmishes where your goal is to kill a significant number of enemies, alongside a few of the other, I would say, usual suspects for the genre. But before you decide which missions to undertake and everything, you might want to poke around your barracks and get your individual soldiers or companions set up. Now, you can have up to a roster of 50 people employed, which will have all sorts of levels and classes available, though you can also customize the appearance of these individuals as well as any animal companions that they may have. So there's a fair bit of personalization that you can certainly make use of, but purely in a more practical sense, there's also those 6 classes on top of the weapons that that individual has equipped that make up their usefulness in combat. The classes themselves are things like the Alchemist, the Crusader, the Beastmaster, the Flayer, the Duelist, or the Gunner. As you take out your companions into missions and succeed, they'll gain experience, causing them to level up, which allows you to enhance them further via their talent tree. This is based, of course, on what class they happen to be, and every time they level up, you'll be able to pick and choose between a few different abilities that allow you to specialize what they are good at, but that's only half the story, because the other part of it is what weapons they have equipped. Each class has a few different weapons they can choose from, and as you upgrade the quality of those weapons via the forge at your base, you'll pick up weapons weapon skills as well, and those in combination with your class make up their general skill set that you'll be able to use in combat. So important stuff to know before you set out on a mission, but once you actually get to that point, you can head over to the world map and see what is available. Now in Chapter 1, it's a pretty linear experience, walking you through a few main missions that get your primary buildings and your base unlocked, but once you hit Chapter 2, things start to open up a fair bit, where you'll be able to pick and choose between missions that pop up as time and days go by that you'll have the option to send out squads to approach. Now initially you can have up to 2 squads working at once, which happen to be teams of 4, but as you upgrade your castle in your domain, the size of these squads and the amount of them you're allowed to have will go up, allowing you to take on more missions at once. But basically, there are missions that will be temporarily available that you can send a squad to go handle, which will net you resources to spend on upgrading your base, provided of course you don't take too much damage to your companions in the long run. And then there's the actual main missions, which are always available whenever you happen to be ready to progress the story a little bit. So you decide which mission you want to do, decide which companions you'd like to take along, customizing their gear any which way you please before you send them off, before doing just that, and starting the actual mission. So from there, let's talk a little bit about combat. So combat in Crown Wars is, as you might suspect for a TRPG, a turn-based tactical system that leans on a pretty free-form action system, interactions with your environment via things like, say, siege weaponry, and your weapon and class skills to form the bulk of what is on offer in terms of its tactical advantages. Now, each of your characters on your turn can be moved in any which order you please. Each of them has one action that can only be used for movement. This is the blue diamond you'll see above their action bar. However, if you want, you can use the other 2 actions that you have for movement as well, or you can use them to attack, meaning that at most you'll be able to attack twice per turn with whatever actions you have available to you, which outside of your more contextual abilities also includes things like Overwatch and defense. Now the fun of combat here is setting up your squad and thus exactly what options you have available to you before the combat even begins, but then utilizing their unique combination of class skills to pin down enemies with, say, individual status effects like burning or poisoned, and then capitalizing on those effects with, say, another class like a duelist that can guarantee a critical hit on an enemy that is wounded that way, just as an example of a sort of cross-class combo you can set up. But one thing you have to watch out for is enemies with armor. Each point of armor, which are those gray blips under an individual's health bar, and each one of those will reduce incoming damage by 10%. So in those cases, you might need to find ways around that, such as hitting them with a mace, which can knock off some of their armor, or there are abilities such as simply using a crossbow with an alchemist to pierce through armor altogether, as an example. And while a lot of that is, I would say, pretty self-explanatory if you're familiar with the genre, one thing in particular that I really liked messing around with was the environmental actions. Oftentimes you can find things like ballista or siege weaponry scattered around individual levels that, if you get close to, you can utilize to pretty devastating effect against the enemy, which can help you overcome, say, overwhelming numbers against you. And I think all of that in combination with the pretty weighty and brutal animations on your actual attacks, including some pretty devastating kill cams for a TRPG, definitely gives the game a very gritty, low fantasy feel. With you throwing your alchemist's flasks to set things on fire 1 second, only to be bashing in a breastplate with a mace the next. But this video wouldn't, of course, be complete without talking a little bit more about our base. Now, as I already mentioned here, this is where we'll be able to manage the roster of companions we'll have access to, but it's also where we'll go to recruit them if any of them happen to fall in battle, as if you have companions fall in battle a certain number of times, they will eventually pass away on you, requiring them, of course, to be replaced. And every so often your roster of fresh potential recruits will change, which you can access from the barracks. But there's a host of other buildings in your domain as well, and once you get out of Chapter 1, you should have access to all of them, which you can spend the resources on that you'll gain from battle to upgrade to increase their functionality. But by and large, you have things like the laboratory, which allows you to research and then purchase consumable items to use in combat, such as healing items or an ability to clear status effects. Then there is the Forge. The Forge is going to allow you to research upgrades to your armor and weapons to make them just better across the board. So if you research a reinforced mace. Every character that utilizes a mace on your team will now use that better mace, which comes with better weapon skills, and then upgrading their armor is pretty self-explanatory as well. So that's important. And when the forces of evil inevitably lay some of your companions low, you'll be forced to send them to the chapel for healing, which happens when they actually fall in combat. In order to use them again, they'll need to be rehabilitated first. So trying to minimize damage you take in individual combat missions is of course important as always to avoid someone's untimely demise, forcing you to think a bit tactically here. Now, general injuries that your characters take that don't result in them actually completely going down in combat will simply heal over time, but otherwise you'll need to have the chapel outfitted so you can restore any downed companions. Another cool mechanic, though, is the prison system. You see, in certain combat missions, you'll be able to take prisoners, provided you bring some shackles with you, and prisoners provide passive bonuses to your combat troops if you choose to keep them around. However, you can instead ransom them off and get a bunch of gold for their release, which means taking prisoners in combat can be an especially lucrative way to go about things, but you have to have room in your prison to do so, which I thought was a pretty fun mechanic. Another building you have, though, is your market. Now, you're going to have typically more gold than actual physical resources, which means you'll be able to spend that gold in the market on actual resources, like, say, wood, metal, or leather, to then spend on specific upgrades, like, say, upgrading your individual buildings or performing bits of research to keep your progress on your domain moving. If you're having trouble isolating a specific resource you need, that's where the market can help you out. And increasing all of these buildings will eventually upgrade the level of your domain overall, increasing your troops and your own power as you go, which is, in addition to tactically sound thinking in combat, what is going to help you put a stop to the forces of evil in Crown Wars: The Black Prince, which is pretty much all I've got for you for this particular video. But do remember, if you like what you saw here, there's a link below that you can click to find out more about Crown Wars: The Black Prince, which again is coming to PC, PS5, Xbox Series X and S, and Switch at a later date. But in the meantime, do let me know what you think of Crown Wars down in the comments section below, which naturally means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.